Empty hearts and neon lights. They're playing with my mind.
Hello guys and welcome to day 24 of making YouTube videos and having fun. I'm joined by David Bullheis this morning, this evening,
Hello,
this
hello.
afternoon, depending where you're listening. That's one that might have to come out. Listening. Anyway, we're going to discuss Trump's State of the Union address. What are your first thoughts, David?
Well, I was intrigued by the speech. I actually thought it was pretty good for the most part. And he was excellent at manipulating emotions via his theatrics. I was actually quite fascinated with the way he was bringing people up or mentioning their names at very key points in the speech.
I have the transcript right in front of me right now, so I can really bump through. There's lots of pauses for applause. So he says the unemployment rate for African Americans, Hispanic Americans, and Asian Americans has reached the lowest levels in history.
See,
Go ahead.
I always have found those numbers quite interesting. I'm not sure exactly how they draw those numbers and how they define unemployment. It seems that the definition changes almost daily.
Yes, I believe here the unemployment rate is not including people who aren't looking for work.
Mm-hmm.
Which, when you take that out, it actually can take out quite a lot of your population.
Yes, it affects the numbers pretty significantly.
It does. It really does. And other people who will draw their own numbers, they'll use different statistics to say, well, in fact, Trump rules out 8% of African Americans, women, who say they're not looking for work, but we actually think that number is more like 2%. So they will, that's a 6% difference there.
It's a huge swing, and it makes a big difference in public opinion.
It really does. And that's one of those things that they say, right? You can manipulate a statistic to tell you whatever you want it to tell you.
Right. Well, that's exactly it. It's like during the Obama era, they had changed the meaning of unemployment by defining part-time as full employment. So, I mean, just by doing that, you change the unemployment statistic massively, and then people forget that that's included in the statistic. And it just makes it much less significant when you realize that, a large part of your full-time employment is actually part-time workers.
There are some better statistics in his speech. Like he says, since his election, the net worth of the bottom half of wage earners has increased by 47%. That's a good statistic. That's not as easily manipulated, I would say.
No, and I think it would be easier for people to call him on it. But by the by, it seems like most people in the lower rungs of society have experienced an upward shift in their wages since he took office.
Well, you would expect, honestly, this is me playing devil's advocate here a little, you would expect over 3.5 years of him being president, or actually just over 3 years really, that you would expect your salary to go up. You really do. I've experienced quite a significant increase in salaries from 3 years ago.
Well, so have I. I've seen mine rise steadily since he took office.
But I wouldn't necessarily say that's a result of Trump, and I'd say that's more a result of it's right for me at least, for my situation. It is very hard for the hospital to hire quality workers to do what I do. We have reached the bottom of the market, or the bottom of the barrel, and so to speak. Good quality workers who will turn up to work just aren't out there anymore. And so they've had to increase people's salaries, because if they don't, they're just going to get paid more for being an honestly good worker.
As I have kind of scraped the bottom of the barrel as far as work is concerned for the last few years, I have also heard the same thing as I've interviewed and worked for multiple jobs or multiple companies now. And but the thing is, even with the higher, or even if they're paying you more just because you show up to work and you work hard, they're able to pay you more than they normally would, even if they were paying you for the same reason a few years ago. Jobs where I was getting paid and it was good pay, like $13 an hour as an example, was considered a few years ago to be a good hourly wage for somebody who showed up. Now I'm making $20 to $25 an hour working jobs where you're expected to show up and work. And people are willing to pay that, where they probably would not have been able to pay that just a few years ago.
Yeah, I agree. And so I'm not sure that I wouldn't necessarily say Trump is to can reap the rewards of that particular statistic. Because I don't think whoever was in power, I don't think that necessarily is going to have changed. I think that's more of a societal issue, which we could probably discuss in a different podcast. The state of the current.
That's a whole nother.
It's actually a really interesting topic, actually. We could almost diverge onto that if you wanted to. The state of the bottom of the barrel when it comes to employment.
In fact, maybe we should have that as a topic for next week.
We shall.
It's definitely a fascinating.
It is. Let's discuss that next week. How bad you have to be right now as an employee to even get fired from a job at Spectrum is you would not believe. I'll save my stories for next week.
Well, it's certainly a cultural issue. I saw this when I was working at the auto parts manufacturer Apex when I was still in Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
The high washout for a manufacturer who was just desperate for people to stay and was paying incredibly well for it.
Interesting.
So, but yes, let's make that the topic of next week, and we could actually come armed with some facts. Anecdotes are one thing.
I know. They're hilarious.
Oh, of course they are, as we all are well aware.
Yeah. Okay, so we got this line from Trump. Since my election, U.S. stock markets have soared 70%, adding more than 12 trillion to our nation's wealth, transcending anything anyone believed was possible. This is a record. It is something that every country in the world is looking up to. They admire. And then, pause for applause.
Of course.
Yeah. So he's not wrong. The stock market has been doing phenomenally well since he got elected. In a trend that that Obama was going up at the end of Obama's reign, and it's continued to go up as it should, especially since he's reduced regulation, meaning easier for the market to expand. Long story short, basically, it's doing that increases manufacturers' confidence to open more plants, more jobs. Therefore, the value of the market goes up. Mm-hmm. Do you think that it will continue to go up? So say he wins re-election in 2020, end of this year, and then he's in power again until 2024. Do you think it'll continue to go up all the way through to the end of 2024?
I do. I think a lot of our economic prosperity hinges on the 2020 election. So, again, another anecdote before we talk about, some more hard facts here. My dad and I are investing in property to purchase homes and then, and quickly flip them. And much of our investments we're trying to complete our sales before November, because if Trump isn't elected, and this comes from talking to a lot of realtors and other agents in real estate around Oregon, are deeply concerned that if Trump is not reelected, that the housing market is going to crash. And this is in large part due to a loss of confidence in the economy, and people are just going to stop, and investors are going to stop investing in homes and real estate for fear of new regulations at the federal level. So a lot of people, it seems, are they're trying to do as much business as they can before the election, and then they're going to wait and see until after the election is over. And if Trump is not reelected, we could see a lot of people pull their money from the market, and in every market you could think of, due to loss of confidence.
Yep. I mean, I can definitely see that happening, and there's a lot of, for instance, another small anecdote. A friend of mine has pulled all of his money out of the stock market and is just holding it in liquid cash right now, as he doesn't know what's going to happen in the next 9 months. Obviously,
I think it's going to be...
Go ahead.
Oh, what were you going to say?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's... obviously when Trump won the election last time, it was a surprise, but I think they will have increased polling, and I think it'll be fairly obvious closer to the election how close it will be. It's interesting to note that even in Europe, whilst they might have said Hillary had a 95% chance to win, the bookies had her about 52%. So, the people who actually, the gambling market had her at a much closer and much more correct odds. And I think the stock market will react with a lot of uncertainty if it seems to be like Trump will lose or Trump will win. Something will happen, and you can almost predict what's going to happen based upon where the money is moving.
Well, this is a trend that has actually followed for the last 2 decades, where anytime a Democrat has been elected, the stock market takes a dive for fear of increased regulations. And then it generally sees a jump anytime a Republican president is elected. And who knows? I mean, I don't know if it'll continue following that trend. I have my own thoughts about our economic system as it is. I don't think it's tenable. And I think that even if Trump is reelected, that there very well could be a loss of confidence as more and more people realize that their assets aren't worth anything, especially their cash. Um, this is one of my concerns is when thinking about this economy, and especially in the real estate market. There's nothing real. I'm watching houses that 10 years ago would cost about $100,000 to purchase, and so you had to put $10,000 down. You had a relatively low interest rate in your mortgage rate, and actually it's a little bit further back than that, right? It's pre the '08 crash. Now those same homes are going for $300,000 and $400,000, and I don't know where this money's coming from. And that's my deep concern is there's no such thing as an affordable housing market anymore, at least on the West Coast. But I was seeing the same thing happen in Michigan, where housing prices were beginning to skyrocket. I mean, out here, you're seeing little 3-bedroom, 2-bath ranch houses, single level, 1,500 square feet, going for $400,000 in a crappy location. And then you see the people that are purchasing these homes, and you just wonder, and at least me, I'm wondering where all this money's coming from. And if none of this money is real, because it isn't, it's only a matter of time before people start defaulting en masse like they did in '08. So my concern is we're making the exact same mistake again, but much worse.
Who do you think is... So I just looked back real quick at the Dow Jones over the last 20 years. Actually, I went back to when Obama got elected, and in 2012, and it did see a little dip right when he got elected, but it continued to grow. And then in 2016, let's just skip forward here, I'm going real slowly. In September 23, it was 18.2. It really continued to climb pretty steadily. Well, I guess we'll get a much bigger truth of how this will be if we see in come November, if we're still around. The Earth hasn't gone to pot then. Interesting. Yeah, I did see a little bit on the 2012 one. It did seem to drop in the 2008 temporarily. When it comes to obviously the last crash, you could say was centered around zero prime mortgages, right? Them lending money to people who could never pay it back, and everyone knew they could never pay it back. It was just this big lie they were all perpetuating. I just don't think that's the same thing these days. It's not as easy to get approved for a house. I mean, obviously it is easy.
It's not that it's as easy as it was in '08, but it's that they're making much larger mortgages with and the interest rate isn't that high right now, right? I don't know exactly what the percentage is. It's like 3 or 4%. So it's not backbreaking. I'm seeing a lot of refinancing, which means that the mortgage market or the mortgage percent or interest rate is quite a bit lower than it has been.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is where my concern comes from is just the shockingly high amount of debt that people are going into just to own a small home that almost assuredly is not going to accrue value like they used to, right? The old adage was that you would purchase a small starter home and then you would upgrade after about 5 years, and about $100,000, or your home would accrue, between $50,000 and $100,000 in value. So that's essentially what you made, and then you would upgrade to the next size home and so on, right?
Yep.
I don't think that's physically possible anymore because of the substantial debt that people are going into to purchase these homes, and now the market's already looking like it's stagnating. So people are going to be saddled with a lot of debt and assets that are actually losing value, and that's a problem.
One of the reasons why I bought a condo was specifically because I didn't want to go into as much debt as a house was for the same square footage, considering I did not think in the next 8 years the house would be worth that much more. So I'll give you some anecdotes. I bought my condominium. It's 1,890 square feet, so just say 2,000 square feet, and I bought it for $143,000.
Yeah.
Considering it's 3 bedrooms, 114 Grand Rapids, decent place. No bad guys banging in my door. My car isn't getting jacked. 143,000. There are houses right now going for 100,000 more. Same square footage. Okay, it's a house, not a condo, so it's got a little bit of yard. 100,000 more. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. Exactly pretty much the same thing.
Right.
And in all conscience, I just didn't think it was worth putting an extra $100,000 in to have the word house in front of my name, in front of the house, in front of the address, whatever. You know what I mean?
Well, Precisely. I know exactly what you mean. You've protected yourself in a sense. I appraised a house. Was it? I can't remember what. Last week, I appraised a house. It was falling apart. Right. It was about a 2,000 square foot home. It was in the middle of the ghetto. It was dilapidated, old. It was a 1950s home, very poor condition. I mean, it was just you'd have to spend probably $200,000 fixing the home. That's how bad it was. So it would almost be more profitable to knock it down and build something new on top, right?
Yep.
Well, the house was going for $280,000 was their asking price for a dilapidated home on a tiny lot in the ghetto. Okay, that's shockingly high. I mean, that's shockingly high.
Mm-hmm.
But that's because of this inflated economy that we're living in. But anyways, here we go once again down or tangentially down the economics discussion.
A lot of it does result in that. I mean, I think to at least the naked eye, if Trump comes out of his presidency at the end of 2024, if he wins the second election, and the economy is still strong and we haven't had a huge bubble or crash, I think most people will look back on it, in years to come as a successful presidency. Whereas if he does see a 2008 style collapse of the market, whether or not he's to blame, and Bush wasn't to blame for the last one, it'll still taint his pregnancy, his presidency. Wow.
Unfortunately, I know I'm the same. I have a hard time talking sometimes, but unfortunately, and it's only because they're the head of state that they get blamed or are given a praise for the economy when really they don't have much to do with it. The president doesn't.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
But I also understand why. I mean, obviously they're doing everything they can to put their name in front of any positive economic growth. As always. But culturally, I get frustrated with people's obsession with GDP and economic growth.
Yep.
Because I think it really gets in the way of more serious issues at hand, issues that people are afraid to address these days. It's easy to talk about economic numbers. It's much more difficult to talk about cultural issues.
It is.
And that's a frustration I have with conservatives as a whole, at least mainstream conservatives. But anyways, it's perhaps it's a good segue into the rest of his speech.
It's a long, long speech. I mean, I didn't actually listen to the whole thing, but
neither did I. I watched the opening statements. I watched, and I watched the highlights. I was watching it live for a little while before I got distracted with some work. But something that I found really interesting was Trump is actually very good at playing the identity politics game when it suits him.
Yes,
I don't know if you noticed, but several times he brought up left-wing issues using either black or it was primarily black individuals.
Yeah, and a few Hispanics.
It was blacks and Hispanics primarily. In order to get clips of the left sitting while he's praising, right-wing policies using ethnic individuals. I thought that was actually a stroke of genius. Now, I don't necessarily like it, but it certainly shows that he's not the bumbling idiot that a lot of people still think he is.
He's not stupid when it comes to. I mean, don't forget the man ran a very successful American show that ratings-wise was extremely successful in The Apprentice, and of course those beauty pageants, whatever you want to call them, Miss World, Miss Universe, Miss USA.
Yes.
He knows what the crowd like. He's a real crowd pleaser, and whether he does that by going down to by talking to the lowest person listening to him, the lowest intelligence person listening to him, that you could make that argument quite easily, I think.
Well, I think, especially when appealing to the masses, he used their emotions against them, right? It's like when he introduced the soldier who had just come home from war, and he was there to surprise his family. That's always going to tear at the heartstrings. Mm-hmm. And it's also a stroke of genius because he also has his chief of staff and the full military command staff there. Right. So he's both simultaneously tugging at the heartstrings of the American people and showing the generals, the pleasure of a soldier returning home and just sort of demonstrating almost the will of the people to bring the troops home from the Middle East. I think it was a stroke of genius, at least with the theatrics.
Yeah, it was. It was totally a public spectacle. It was designed for television, with him presenting people with medals. Rush Limbaugh with the Medal of Freedom, which that's another separate argument we can discuss another time. Yeah, personally not a fan of Rush Limbaugh. Not because I don't think he's a conservative, but because he's exactly what I don't like in my opposition. A guy who rants and raves with very, very biased statistics against certain groups. I don't know. I hold myself to a higher standard than he holds himself to. Yes, I understand he's conservative. But
he's also well, I shouldn't even go the money route. If we want to talk about Limbaugh real quick, see, I have a problem with almost all mainstream conservatives, and I use those with heavy quotations.
Okay. Yeah, like Ben Shapiro, for instance.
Don't even go there. I don't even know what he is. It's like, or Mark Levin, right? I don't think Mark Levin's a conservative at all. He may hold some conservative talking points, but I think the idea of a conservative has been totally co-opted by Republicans and Democrats, and it no longer actually means what people think it means.
Well, that segues into an interesting question. What does conservative mean to you?
Well, this would get us totally off topic.
No, it's okay. We're coming towards the end.
If you like to zig and zag, that's perfectly fine with me. See, I struggle with this question because what it means to be conservative is to conserve one's culture and the cultural ways. Roger Scruton, who's actually one of my favorite historians, he happens to be English. Guy's brilliant. He just passed away, unfortunately. But his definition of conservatism was to preserve that which the people who came before you loved. And it's a poetic way to put it, but in a sense, it's very true, right? So it's preserving the traditions and the religion and just really the ways of your ancestors. So a conservative doesn't care so much about the GDP. A conservative doesn't care about going to war in the Middle East for other people's interests. A conservative doesn't care about, other people's affairs necessarily. They care about preserving their own culture, right? And not necessarily projecting it.
Okay.
So I suppose that's my definition. It's certainly a sort of pre-Enlightenment sort of conservatism.
No, I agree. I will honestly tell you I've not heard that position before. That's not a position I've ever heard before, so that's interesting.
It's something that I would love to try and propagate because I think people need to realize that that's what's important.
Okay, we can do another topic for another day too then. What is conservatism?
Most certainly, but for me, out of curiosity, what are your thoughts in that regard?
For me, conservatism is about, I'll start financially, balancing a budget, not spending more than you earn, not trying to be the first person to change the culture, neither being the last. So you're neither the guy at the front who's wearing the new fancy dress, neither are you the Puritan behind who's stuck 700 years ago still wearing that outfit. Conservative, in the broad sense of the word. If you say he was dressing a little bit conservative, I don't think he should be outlandish in general. I don't think he should be flashy. I don't think you should be boisterous. When it comes to conducting yourself, you should be conducting yourself with class and grace. The Queen is conservative. She might not be a conservative politician, but she's a conservative individual. As you say, preserving the past, I hadn't really ever put it like that before, or even heard it put like that. But that is a fundamental principle with which she seems to have been conducting herself for the last 50 years.
That's exactly what the crown represents to the English, it seems.
Yeah, for me it's so important if you're conservative. Small government, less government involvement, conservative government involvement. You think of conservative, if you say he ate conservatively, you think, well, he ate less than someone who ate liberally. Small, balance your budget, small, reduce government involvement, reduce red tape, reduce bureaucracy. Those are fundamental conservative principles.
There is, but there's something else that's interesting. It's going to cause a very fascinating clash and may actually create some very strange alliances. It is because I think that conservatives, at least amongst the broader Western populaces, is certainly moving in this direction with national populism, is this disdain for multinational corporatism as well. It's not just smaller government, but
smaller businesses.
It's smaller businesses, precisely, because these multinational corporations, not only do they shirk national identities, but they destroy local communities. And if you're a conservative in any sense of the word, you would have to be opposed to these massive corporations.
Yep. No, that seems logical for me for right now. I can't think of an argument against that. It does seem, yeah, you're right. That does trend with the word conservative. You know, you don't want. It's not. You're right. The definition of conservative would definitely be opposed to one ruling world order, one world government. And in that perspective, if you can't have a one world government, why can you have a one world supermarket or one world clothing store?
That's exactly it.
Which is simplifying the argument, but at the same time makes it simpler to understand.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, it actually does become a very complicated question once you start to ask the question, well, how the heck do you limit multinational corporations and large governments at the same time? This is a very difficult topic to reconcile.
Yes, you're right. How can you have less government involvement, but more government involvement in areas of where? Yeah, I see what you're saying.
Right, because then the question is, well, do you use the government for yourself in order to limit these corporations? But then, of course, the fallacy is then, well, are you not being a hypocrite by enlarging the government to achieve your own ends and thereby leaving a larger government than the one that you wish to reduce? It gets to be a very difficult question that I haven't totally reconciled myself.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I think we'll about wrap it up there. That's enough chit-chat for one day. If we try and do this at least once a week, then I think...
Let us do it. I really enjoy these conversations, truly.
Oh, so
I
do
don't
I.
get to have enough of them these days.
Okay, I'm going to finish with a lovely quote from the end of his speech, which try to hold your laughter to the end, please. The nation is our canvas, and this country is our masterpiece. We look at tomorrow and see unlimited frontiers just waiting to be explored. Doesn't this sound like Sean, Bean reading this at the beginning of a Civ 6 game? Our brightest discoveries are not yet known. Our most thrilling stories are not yet told. Our grandest journeys
are
not yet made. He must do. The American age, the American epic, the American adventure has only just begun. Our spirit is still young. The sun is still rising. God's grace is still shining. And my fellow Americans, the best is yet to come. It's a very good ending. I'm not going to lie. I think he does have a Civ 6 player on his stuff.
It's amazing. It sounds like we're about to start up the industrial age.
It does. It really does. It really does. Oh, wow.
Oh, it's fantastic. But
thanks very much for joining me, sir. Have a good rest of your week in Texas.
I shall. Let's have another one of these later this week.
We will. Friday, most likely. And what was the topic we're going to discuss? I
think it was just a broader economic discussion.
No, it was going to be a topic on employees, the bottom of the barrel when it comes to employees. What can you get away with in 2020 thanks to the shortage of working employees? Come with anecdotes and not very many facts.
Yeah, so anecdotes are far more fun.
They are. They are indeed. All right, take care, sir. Take care.
All right, you too. All right, see you, buddy.